In the southeastern edge of the Empire of Anbennar lies a small country with a strangely unique black and white checkered flag. The same pattern can be found on the garbs of their nobility. The unusual fashion is not a coincidence, for despite their small footprint, Toarnen are destined to teach the game of chess to Cannor and the world. Toarnen is a small prince in the Empire of Anbennar, with human culture and administration. Their particular culture is Arranese. They are stoic and gritty, with pale skin, and are considered as descendants of an ancient people called Milkori, who themselves were destroyed in the wars of the Sorcerer King against the Witch King of Castanor. Toarnen's cultural identity is strongly defined by their Roilsardi heritage. The Roilsardi are a Lenkori people from the western side of the Divenhall Sea. Lenkori Crusaders have historically settled into the surrounding areas before the start of the game, and they have had a lasting influence on local cultures. For Toarnen, this translates to an appreciation of wine, fashion, and increased nobility prestige, even if the environment does not allow for any of these passions to thrive like they do in the fertile West. Toarnese ideas do not stand out in any particular ways. They begin with fort maintenance and army tradition bonuses, of which only the army tradition is more impactful. They will not be able to afford any forts for quite some time, even with a small discount on maintenance. The other ideas are a combination of defensive and diplomatic ones, but none of the ideas are particularly strong, with the only notable ones being the 10% infantry combat ability and the 10% development cost bonus one. The ruler of the nation is Countess Adelaide Silnalop, with fairly low stats and an obsessive perfectionist trait, which hinders any plans for quick and easy infrastructure developments. Not ideal, but she will have to rule for quite some time due to the fact that she is middle-aged and does not start with an heir. Toarnen starts isolated and poor. Not only that, but one of their more fertile provinces begins with a minus 70% minimum local autonomy debuff. The Border Cliff province is mostly useless and the rest of the land has low development, rough terrain, and poor resources. To its immediate west, it borders the hated Chiliande, Toarnen's historical rival, and Arannen, the Salt Lion, who claims to be the hegemon of Arannese culture. To the east, the bleak swamps of Daravan's Folly lie devoid of civilization, but Varian and Arannese colonists are both ready to race each other for control over the marshy, gnoll-infested provinces. To the southeast, Nathalair is a rich city of shady and secretive people who will further plague the Toarnen coastal towns with their brutal pirate raids. Otherwise, the flooded coast to the south does open up some routes for expansion into the southeast across the Divenhall Sea and into Ourdia and Bahar, if Toarnen moves their pieces with sufficient cunning and grace. Toarnen emerged in 1444 on the winning side of the Lilac Wars, last of which was fought across Anbennar between the House of Silmuna and the victorious rulers of Lorent. This puts them in a great position to ally with the current emperor of Anbennar, Vex. They can easily secure the alliance of the Prince of Shugamber and the King of Busilar, who have guaranteed Toarnen's survival and independence during the Lilac Wars. Being a prince in the empire also gives them the emperor's guarantee of safety against outside threats, which is slightly comforting. Countess Adelaide is not the most competent ruler and definitely not the richest, but she has romantic dreams as she remembers the stories her father read to her about the beautiful vineyards of Roilsard. She spends her meager fortune on lavish parties for the nobility every year, but this year her mind is set on action. Her people are loyal but independent. Their drunken shouts of "Death to Lorent" or "Our homeland isn't lost" ring hollow in the forest mansions of Aischestir. How can they dream to challenge Lorent when they can barely afford to feed their own? Heirless and destitute, Adelaide does not despair. She summons the Diet and discusses her future plans with the estates. Her military advisors insist on reinforcing Border Cliff. They call it "our shield," but the sour wine must be speaking. Funding a fort in the farmlands of Border Cliff is impractical. While the nobles eagerly begin to construct the fort, the undertaking is cancelled. Instead, her faithful servant and diplomat Marion, after returning from Vex Keep with a declaration of support from the Emperor of Anbennar, is sent to Cheliande's capital port of Sornsel to recruit agents and discover any weak spots that can be exploited in the future. As soon as Marion is dispatched, The Countess herself shocks the representatives of the estates with a bold decision. She decides to embark on a diplomatic trip to the last surviving Roilsardi duchy, Saloren. So she starts the journey together with Aril of the Rose Knights and a small posse of servants. They set sail to the western edge of the Empire of Anbennar to establish an embassy and dialogue between the two duchies. After 2 years, she returned to Eisgestir. She expected a hero's welcome, but only a small delegation is waiting in port. No matter, she has returned with a great gift from Count Kilian Silvivin of Saloren. Her visit resulted in her betrothal to the rich winemaker Laurence Silnalop, and a gift more valuable than his personal fortune. She returned with a newborn son, Marion I Silnalop. Her dream to make Toarnen more than a backwater country has started to take shape. After 2 years pass, her crown's lack of control over the lands are immediately obvious. But the loyalty and influence of the nobility is crucial at this time. They have successfully mustered the arrayers, and they were ready to fight for something more than squabbling over their petty fields and modest vineyards. To celebrate the return of the Countess, the Toarnen black wine is promoted in taverns. It's not the best, but its quality stems more from the way that it spreads Adelaide's contagious dream. Her agents have done a good job promoting Cheliande's potential threat to her own people. With her renewed prestige, the estates have come forth offering a compromise to solve her weak control over the land, but she refuses to grant statutory rights. Once the wine is flowing and the soldiers are prepared against the common foe, the nobles will not even notice as the crown will slowly take back their lands. They are distracted by drink and the promises of mansions and titles across the border. In April 1447, Marion's men managed to stage a murder on the docks of Saloren. A rich foreign merchant was killed by a falling crate. Toarnen black blood was given to other dock workers in the vicinity, and a massive fight erupted in port, while Adelaide's spies vanished in the shadows. Count Alain II's international reputation was severely damaged, while his own men were racked with confusion and mistrust. As soon as the first letters about the incident reached the court, Toarnen staked their claim on Saloren and demanded the port on the threat of war. With the enemy at the gates, eager for a fight, no diplomatic support, and his own men disloyal, Alain II of Cheliande fled to the countryside, and the city was taken without any resistance. To keep the people of the rivals' ruined capital in check, the local burghers were rounded up and offered autonomy in exchange for loyalty, and thus the Sorncel chapter was declared in the new Toarnese core province. A quick succession of 2 small but splendid victories for Adelaide. But her modest celebration on the shores of Eisgestir were to be disrupted by news of black sails and cannon fire. As the reorganization of the new coastal holdings is underway, letters come in describing the start of the Ebortili War of Conquest against the pirates of Nathalair. Ebortil is a trading nation with one of the most powerful fleets in the Divenhall Sea, sponsored by the rich holdings on the island of Tef. No time was wasted, and even though she was showing signs of waning health, Adelaide decided that this is the time to secure the Toarnese coasts by attacking the pirate city while their black ships are distracted. The horns of war sounded, and the arrayers began their march through the eastern swamps. In 1453, though, morning bells accompanied the chorus of war trumpets, and a week of mourning was declared. Countess Adelaide went to bed to dream her final dream, and Prince Consort Laurence Silnalop took the throne and continued the campaign to raise the checkered flag over Nathalair. The Toarnese admirals deftly maneuvered the modest fleet against the enemy, and while the pirates were distracted, the arrayers landed on the island. No prayers to Nathaleen could hide the pirate counts, and the rich island city was easily captured. Keeping it as a land of the crown was declared impractical, so a deal was signed and Nathalair became a vassal state under the county of Toarnen. In the year 1461, the child Prince Marion I came of age and took the throne. His upbringing made him an above-average diplomat and a cunning administrator. He would grow up playing chess, a game which became a more beloved companion to the Toarnen black wine in Eisgestir's taverns. In a bold and shocking move, Marion sent envoys to Lorent. Despite the propaganda, the Roilsardi ambitions had no chance to compete with the sheer might of the Lencori Hegemon. He successfully secured the royal marriage between a local noble and a Laurentish one, and soon after the two crowns shook hands and forged an alliance, granting protection to Laurentish trade fleets from any pirate raids in exchange for military guarantees against any rival aggressors. Letters report that Toarnen adopted a policy of driving back the gnolls from Daravan's folly, and they have sent colonists south of the Brink Marches to slowly claim the lands for the Salt Lion throne. A council with the Nathalir governors resulted in a cunning plan. Toarnen's coffers are still poor and unprepared for a similar push, but if the goblins of Landshark could be driven off the coast of Ourdia, Nathalir could use its resources to perform similar operations to the Arranese. The goblins stood little chance, and soon they were driven off, their lands handed to the Nathaliri governors, and they moved quickly to dispatch colonists of their own into the folly. Soon enough, the western Bahari coast and the Gem Isle were under the firm control of the checkered flag as well. South of the former lands of Landshark, the keepers of the citadel of Pal Ourd have made a grave mistake. They have allied Toarnen's sworn enemy Cheliande. Marion I moved the Rook to Ourdia and declared war. This allowed him to eliminate Cheliande from the map and history books forever, to the shock of the princes of Anbennar. He annexed Cheliande with the blessing of Vex, letting the rest of the empire to scramble in talks about creating a coalition against his aggressive expansion into the lands of another prince. Ourdia swelled fealty to Toarnen and became their vassal, working together with Nathalir to protect the southern flank from incursions of goblins and occasional orcish warbands that roamed the mountains of the Serpent Reach. The cost of victory was great though. With little manpower and little money left in the coffers, with diplomatic support waning, the Prince of Toarnen decided to appease the rest of the empire with comforting speeches and with the declaration of an anti-monstrous crusade against the goblin presence in Dostanor and the Bahar. The crusades ended up humiliating and destroying the goblin tribes of Mountain Hunger and Obshibild. Internally, the prestige following these campaigns allowed Marion to take more crown lands from the estates. But to the north, the unpopular policies of Vex and their waning legitimacy caused a seismic shift in the balance of powers within the Empire of Anbennar. The electors decided to crown the Prince of Istralor as the new emperor. Toarnen took no time to pledge allegiance to the new emperor and sign an alliance while breaking diplomatic ties with the new illegitimate Prince of Wexkeep. The splendor of Marion's reign allowed him to push the importance of the decentralization of Anbennar narrative, and thus, in his later years, his focus switched towards the empire. The Arayers were sent to take advantage of the conflict between Toarnen's rival of Aranen and Sugamber. Aranen was subjugated, and all the free Arranese people would now proudly don the black and white checkered uniform. The Ordians and the Nathalir formally accepted unification with the Roilsardi heirs of Toarnen, and their lands were permanently annexed. Sinister news from the northeast confirmed that the Corvurian king, descendant of Roilsardi nobility himself, was in truth an immortal vampire, hunting and feeding on the blood of the Corvurian peasants. With renewed zeal, Marion rivaled the vampire king and proved his courage in the eyes of the world by driving a campaign to the heart of Arca Corvur and driving a stake through the heart of this new threat to humanity. The princedom of Ashiniande was liberated and accepted to faithfully serve the Toarnese crown in return. In the name of Arannese unity, Sugamber and Busilar fell to the combined might of the Arayers, the imperial troops of Istralor, and the Wyvern riders of Vern. Bisan and its holy necropolis also surrendered after a few years. The Vexonard free city of Magdalair voluntarily swore allegiance to the vassal of Aranen after the liberation of the necropolis and the surrounding countryside. The key to the city was presented with great pomp in Icechestir to the now aged Prince Marion. In 1516, the aging prince, after 50 years of successful reign, was peacefully laying down in his bedchamber with his beloved son Denar at his side. On the wall, a rich tapestry showing the unified lands of the Arannese people. The gentle breeze coming from the sea hit his rough features, and he felt content and proud. A revived bureaucracy was milling constantly in his princedom. Songs of victory over evil and hymns of unity would be played in taverns and markets all across the borders. Father, Denar intoned, breaking the pleasant silence, tell me one more of my grandmother's stories about the vineyards of Roilsard, please. And so he did. Once the story was finished, he closed his eyes and went to sleep, never to wake up again. Dennar I Silnalop and his wife Bella rose to the throne in 1516. They inherited a powerful state and they started immediately to restructure it and organize it so that the devastation caused by the wars between the Arannese people in the decades prior would be healed. Bastards of the House of Silnalop and various noble families were recruited into the army as the Green Thorn Order. Officers were now recruited from this veteran Crusader order and they would train the arrears and professionalize the army. From a ragtag band of peasants, the checkered army was transformed into a powerful imperial force. News from Escan and historical discoveries in the ancient lands of Elentir promised to change the face of Cannor forever in dramatic ways. The adventure bands east of Corvuria, after decades of battling the Green Tide, have either fallen or emerged as proper warrior kingdoms. Many warriors started the trend of painting an ominous red sword symbol on their shields. As the wars continued and the holy fervor started to spread, praising Corin as the sole savior of humanity and in some eyes, the savior of Orkdom. The vampires of Corvuria, humiliated but not banished, were plotting in their dark castles. Dennar led another campaign against them. The reformed army performed admirably, but the prince was tragically killed in battle in 1619. His son being yet too young, Queen Regent Bella oversaw the peace treaty, which assigned the governors of Asheniande more lands in Dostanor. She publicly rebuked the propaganda that Asheniande's nobility would replace the Arannese black in their cups with something more sinister. The spread of the new Corinid fervor was the more immediate concern on the borders of Dostanor. In celebration of the victory over evil, the Countess Regent announced the organization of the Ice Chestir Open in 1523. The game of chess has already been a favorite pastime of the Toarnese for decades, and it was time to share it with the world. This event became the first international chess tournament, and invitations were sent to all the princes in the Empire of Anbennar. The competition would last for a whole week, and a public holiday was declared for everyone in the princedom. 256 people have signed up, and the games begun. The queen herself, from a wooden throne carved into the shape of a chess king, joined the contest herself. She has personally reached the semi-finals, where she was defeated by her challenger Magnus, a mage of the Magisterium, thanks to a promoted pawn on the left side of the chessboard. Defeated but stronger, the queen learned a thing or two, and the diplomatic reputation of Toarnen has risen to heights never before imagined, even in Adelaide's dreams. The tournament's timing was no coincidence. Later in the year, Varian, the heir prince, finally came of age in 1523. A boy with an intense look in his eyes that betrayed energy and ambition. He inherited a strong and prosperous country. His merchant ships were successfully exporting Toarnese wine to foreign shores. Safe trade routes into the Bahar and Brasan have secured blade imports. These were used by the Ice Chestir weavers to popularize the black and white checkered fashion internationally, and business was booming. With all the prosperity, Varian pursued a policy of opening the doors of the princedom to Roilsardi's fleeing Laurentish persecution. Not only to noblemen, but to simple folk as well. His speech from atop the castle keep balcony was transcribed and spread all across the borders. The Arranese are a mixture of various cultures, including our homelands. We are called the corrupted versions of Roilsardis. Why would we accept to be the inferior version? Let's take the dusty costumes of past parties and joyfully affirm our origin. You do not have to be born on the shores of Roilsard to be Roilsardi. We realize all the good values of our glorious ancestors. We are chivalrous, pious, and dedicated to war. Anyone in Toarnen who follows this path must really be Roilsardi. If those in our ancestral homeland cannot bear the legacy of our people, then we shall be the ones to rise to the occasion. The capital of Ice Chestir was renamed to New Toarnen, and following the prince's speech, the slow cultural shift started. More and more people started to disassociate from the Arannese culture and embrace their ancestral legacy. Due to the failing health of the heirless Count of Arbaran, Varian secured the Arbarani throne for one of his cousins. With the blessing of the Emperor from Istralor, the Arbarani graciously welcomed their new prince, and thus the Anbennar's eastern flanks were secured by two members of the Silnalop family. In the Brink Marches, the Green Thorn Crusaders have built a fortress so strong and mighty that could be seen from Arranen. The remnants of the Green Tide would tremble before its mighty walls. On the Bahari front, the dwarves of Ovdal Tungr, the Copperhold, laid down their arms and hoisted the checkered flag on their ships. Varian did not consider himself a warrior, but mainly a chess player. The armies are but pawns, and pawns do play a crucial role, but the stronger pieces are the ones that win the game. And thus, his rooks and bishops would spread the culture of chess in Esmaria. From the gardens of Lesnipar to the libraries of Conwell, chess variants and strategies would be taught by Toarnese experts. Chess master advisors would serve in the Toarnese court. Diplomats would challenge their imperial counterparts in friendly competition, and move after move the princes of the empire became more and more enraptured by the checkered court's diplomatic cunning. Eventually, the spread of the Corinid fervor reached the imperial seat of Istralur. The emperor donning the red sword sash created a wave of shock throughout Anbennar. One by one, the elector princes would be swayed to vote against the warlike tendencies of the emperor. None could say what the electors have discussed behind the closed doors of the imperial diet of Anbenkost. But when they emerged from their long deliberation in 1541, they have announced that they have elected Varian I Silnalop of Toarnen as the new emperor of Anbennar, with 6 votes against 1. A week of celebration was declared in the nation to honor this historical event. Internally, the chance was taken after more than a century to curtail the charters of Bordercliff and Sorncell. The local burghers have risen up in revolt, but they were made to see reason. In more and more provinces, the people identified as Roilsardi rather than Arranese. And soon enough, Arannese would become a nameless culture, destined to be forgotten. Emperor Varian has declared a great chess tournament, inviting all of the contenders from the empire to New Toarnen, just like his mother did in the Ice Chestir Open. Corvurians were also made to remember and honor their Roilsardi past by the descendants of the nobles and crusaders who came to Dostanor to fight the evils of Escan from centuries before. Ashenyande's governors have granted the keys of Dostanor to the emperor personally. And with all these efforts, 12 years of peace were shattered by the religious differences within the empire. Anbennar was split between the followers of Corin and the dogmatists of the regent court. The treacherous princedom of Vern, backed by the vengeful warriors of Istralor and a myriad of other princedoms and kingdoms in western and eastern Cannor, declared a war of religious supremacy in the year 1553. The members of the Regent Court League rallied behind the emperor, and a 6-year war was fought viciously on the eastern shores of the Dameshead Sea. 6 years of atrocities and bloodshed have ended with the spiritual victory of the Regent Court Pantheon and the military victory of Emperor Varian I Silnalop. The only official Corinite prince left within the empire at the end of the war was the neutral elven princedom of Moonhaven. The King of Lorent was a faithful ally in this war, and he has personally led his chivalrous knights in battle. His heroism and valor could not heal his wounds on the battlefield though, and he drew his final breath in 1560. To come to the aid of the Laurentish people in the name of stability and brotherhood, a Silnalop noble, schooled in Lencore diplomacy and administration, was voted in by the Laurentish Diet as the new king. An expert move by the emperor, which will have wonderful consequences later in history. After the end of the Great War in Anbennar, Emperor Varian continued to rule for 13 years. His reforms brought the empire closer and closer together. He would have to sometimes fight heretic clergymen, not in the field of battle, but in the arena of debate. More and more nations in the Escan would be convinced to join the empire. The continuous conflicts between the human kingdoms and the Orcish ones seemed to have no end in sight, so Anbennar offered the protection that many people longed for. Finally, the bells of morning rang in 1572. Varian drew his last breath in his study, while composing a scalding letter containing insults for his nephew who sat on the Laurentish throne. The last 3 years saw a rapid deterioration of relations between the Roilsardi and the Laurentish branches of the family. and because of greed and maybe madness, they became to see each other as rivals and not family anymore. Evin Silnalop ruled from 1572 to 1602. At the start of his rule, a permanent imperial parliament was instituted in the heart of the empire, Anbennar. His rule will be remembered for the war with the Silnalop family of Laurent. He has condemned the Laurentish cousins and legally claimed the throne of the Lencori Hegemon. 2 years since his rise to the throne, in 1574, Evin has declared a war to enforce a personal union with Laurent, a war from which he emerged victorious. He has continued the chess tradition of his ancestors. The rest of the 28 years of his rule were fairly peaceful. He would engage in diplomatic chess games with the princes of the empire and enacted an imperial constitution reform that would enforce realm peace. No prince would henceforth declare war on another, and any disputes would be settled on the chessboard instead. The empire was blessed with the birth of Evin's daughter. He announced to the world that the name of his daughter is Adelaide. She would be schooled by the finest professors of Cornwall and the most brilliant mages of the magisterium. She would be shown the parade grounds of Istralor and would listen to the tales of the wisest elves from Moonhaven. Her rule would be blessed by the gods, and the letter from old Tamenath confirmed magical proficiency like never before seen in the Roilsardi bloodlines. Her destiny would be great indeed. An empress was never before seen in Anbennar either. Emperor Evin worked tirelessly in his last decade to increase imperial authority. He managed to enact his will, curtailing the imperial estates from ever being able to defy the emperor's will, and in a genial move, he convinced the permanent parliament to abolish the elective nature of the empire. From his rule forward, the imperial crown would be hereditary and not a prisoner of the electoral whims. Adelaide II's coronation would be a splendid event, celebrated across Cannor. Her beauty would be sung by the greatest bards of Seinathil, and her generosity would be praised from Laurentane to Castonath. The imperial crown of thorns was crafted by skilled elven smiths in the forges of Arbaran to put the Balgar smiths of Silverforge to shame. The flags of the fortresses of the imperial cities would show the symbols of Roilsard and Toarnen merged in the center, with the Corvurian white crow on the right and the Crusaders' emblem on the left. Her image on the throne, which was shaped in the form of a chess piece, would be immortalized at the start of the 1604 chess tournament in a painting, as she sat between the statues of Adelaide I and Bel Silnalop. At the end of the grand event, the representatives of all the princes of the empire would convene in the cathedral of New Tournaire to bend the knee as the end of the princely privilegia was declared. The empire of Anbennar would now act with a single purpose, a purpose dictated by the crown of thorns of Toarnen. Ebortil, the trader kingdom, which was so crucial to the pacification of Nathalair, the last independent kingdom in the southern Escan, was also made to bend the knee and accept a personal union with the now supreme Silnalop family. Once the dust settled, the Countess's dreams finally realized. The Roilsardi have come home. Lencenor was integrated into the larger realm and the court was moved into Saloren. Long have the Roilsardis been away from their home, and the time for their triumphal return has come in the year 1647. The court was moved to the sunny shores of the eastern wine bay, and the Toarnen checkered mantle was discarded for the bright wine-colored cape of Roilsard. And so the bards and chroniclers declared the end of history and the beginning of the age of eternal prosperity. Hello everybody, Pukebeard here. To wrap things up, Toarnen was an interesting pick. It's in the Empire of Anbennar. The non-Holy Roman Empire of the setting starts extremely poor and stays that way for a long time. It has a nice flavor and can get some good diplomatic bonuses which you can keep in case you want to reform into another country. Logically, Roilsard is the empire you would thematically want to change to. And look at it, Roilsard has a striking color and a full mission tree. problem is that the mission tree will completely destroy the empire if elections are abolished, due to the fact that it is railroaded into a republic. The unique Tier 1 government reform lets you swap between 3 Roilsardi families, and the ones you pick open up different mission branches down the line. But it killed my campaign because I already revoked the Privilegia and could not hold on to all the vassals at once. There are only a few permanent modifiers of note to be gained aside from heavy buffs to the eastern wine-based state. Theoretically, you could further change into Laurent, but Laurent's mission tree is not working late game either because it requires the nation of Red Glades to exist, and their cores were already gone by the time I could do it, so there was no point to do that either. Anyway, I was eager to work on a video for a nation in the eponymous empire. Unfortunately, different events in the last month, both in my personal life and in the outside world, did not allow me to take the time and did not allow me to have the energy to do this faster, and I apologize for that. I am safe and well, and I wish you the same. I hope the nightmare ends soon. I would like to also thank my first Patreon, Baconomics. If you would like to support me, that's swell, but please prioritize supporting people who are in dire need in these trying times. Cheers, and thank you.